Today, I'm talking with the fabulous Wenn Lawson.
Thank you. I'm talking with you too.
Absolutely, you are.
Mm.
Wen's impact on Australia's autistic community is unparalleled. He works with researchers around the world on vital topics like ageing and quality of life, has written 20 or more books and co-developed monotropism. I might ask you about that, Wen, a landmark person-centred theory to conceptualise autism. With generosity and wisdom, he provides advice, mentors new leaders, supports families, and helps ensure autistic kids' rights are met at school. Dr Wenn Lawson was one of Australia's first autistic advocates and has educated and helped countless autistic people, families, and community members to see autism differently. Wenn is an experienced researcher, public speaker, and author. He's a proud family man and a member of the LGBTQIA+ community. And I'll just introduce you to what the award is that Wenn has received. Wenn is the recipient of the 2021 Lesley Hall Award for Lifetime Achievement in the National Awards for Disability Leadership. This award goes to an individual who has shown commitment to the disability rights movement and worked over time to achieve significant outcomes for disabled people. Welcome, Wenn, and thank you so much for making time to speak to me today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
I'm really interested in how your work's evolved. I mean, you know, the Lesley Hall Award is for the lifetime achievement. So you've been at this for a while. What got you into it? Why are you doing what you're doing?
I was misdiagnosed at the age of 2 with an intellectual disability, and later at 17 as being schizophrenic. And neither of those things really were me. I have friends who were schizophrenic. I have friends with intellectual disability or cognitive issues, and I certainly have a number of learning disabilities. I'm dyslexic and dyspraxic and ADHD and a few things, but I was never at home with those diagnoses. And I spent 25 years in and out of mental institutions, as they were called in those days, and on lots of antipsychotic medications, which really messed up my body with all sorts of things like constipation and horrible stuff. Don't know if you're allowed to say this on tape, but anyway,
we can say anything. Let's tell the truth.
I can't be anything other than authentic. So, and because I was never at home in those things, and it wasn't who I am, I began to explore what I did think was happening for me. And when I was about 40 years old, which is 30 years ago now, I was given a book for a birthday, and I'd been reading this book, and there was so much in this book that was me. This was me. This was me. So I looked into things more, and autism back then wasn't really on the agenda, not for adults. And at that time I was living as a woman, and I had children who were diagnosed as my son, when he was 12, was diagnosed as autistic, and another son with ADHD. And eventually the other two got autism and ADHD as well, but that came a bit later. So as I explored those things, and I thought, well, autism is I just identify so much with this, but the theories about autism, things like we don't have empathy, and theory of mind, lots of problems, challenging behaviors they talked about, all these things. And I thought, well, they got this wrong. I just didn't feel right about it. Behaviors that challenge actually came from the world that we're challenged by, which initiated behavior to try to get us to tell people we're not okay. But no one was listening. So I began to explore what attention is like for autistic people, and it was so obvious, really. And I think that's why it's been missed. It's like too easy to be true, sort of thing. So what I noticed was that once I got my diagnosis and I was meeting other people as autistic adults and reading about autistic people, like Donna Williams and Temple Grandin, are both lovely people that I've met and spent time with, and we just shared so much in common. But what constantly came up was, we're single-minded, we're black and white, and excuse the pun, that sounds awful, but it just means we had a lot of problems with areas that were grey, which is again another metaphor, just meant things that weren't decisive, weren't obvious. We have a lot of problems with social areas that people seem to have hidden agendas that they didn't say what they mean. They used lots of metaphor, which got me into a spot of bother, quite a bit of trouble. And as I looked at it more and more, I thought, but it's because non-autistic people do this thing of multitasking, and they seem to have this ability to do several things at once. They could divide their attention. But in autism, we're really just single focused. Our attention tends to be on one thing. And if you're ADHD as well, then it might be on several things, but usually serial style, one at a time. So the more I explored this, the more I felt this is what's happening in autism. So I met with a friend who was studying to become a psychologist. Her name is Vicky Bitziker. And she's a lovely friend, and she lives and works in New South Wales. But I spent some time with her, and I went over what I thought was happening with autism. And I said, this is what I believe is happening with autism, and we're really mono. We're really one thing at a time. And I wrote down some statements about this, lots of different things, and eventually I built this into a PhD in 2009, which was called SACA, Single Attention and Associated Cognition in Autism, Monotropism, and how it impacted on our senses, external sensory system, our internal sensory system, our interoception. Object permanence is a huge thing in autism. You've got a child who gets taken to school. Interrupt me if I go too fast, because I can get carried away. You've got a child who goes to school, autistic kid, and mum's saying, or whoever is saying, okay, bye, and bye is terminal, forever, the end. So you've got this little person who's terrified, never going to see mum again, never going to see their bedroom again, or their cat or dog or whatever it is. No concept, because people all the time speak in incomplete concepts. They give you part of an understanding, they don't finish it. And that's fine if you're not autistic, because you'll put the ending, you join the dots. Gestalt, you bring it together and make an understanding. You access the bigger picture. But in autism, we're operating like on a very single focused beam of a torch, not the diverse one. So we get a detail, not the big picture. And over time, we can get lots of little bits of detail and build up a big picture. But when you're little, as autistic kids, it's really hard to make sense of things. And because you're single focused, all the senses we live by are heightened or underdeveloped. So noise can be too loud, sights and lights can be too bright. All sorts of things like that are just highlighted. Or if they're underwhelmed, you get little kids who are sensory seeking. They put bits and pieces in their mouths that are not really meant to be edible. They stick their fingers in all sorts of places where they're not meant to go. And they're constantly trying to sort of meet this sensory need that they're living by. And a lot of us live kind of move between the two, not as dramatic as putting things in our mouths that we're not meant to, but a sensory situation which isn't really nicely balanced. So I wear Erling lenses. You can't see them because the wall's the same color, but they're pink.
Yes.
I often have to have, I've got earplugs on the side of the bed here, put those in my ears, or noise cancelling headphones. I can't get too close to people. My wife, as much as I adore her and love her to bits, we've been together 37 years, but if she breathes on me in bed, quick, cover it up with the sheet. And I can't bear it if she gets too close to my ear. All these sorts of things which make us different, but different is not less. And so I've spent years, at least 30 odd years since I was 40, trying to help people understand that autism does not mean you're broken, does not mean you're damaged. It does mean you're different. And some people, that difference can be so extreme that they experience all kinds of trauma, forcing round pegs into square holes or square pegs into round holes, whichever way, and we don't fit. So lots of talking at conferences, talking with teachers at schools to help them understand the young people they're working with, because the behaviors that erupt, and they do. Sometimes you go from sort of 0 to 10 very quickly. I try and keep my hands still. Oh, head's gone off the top of the screen.
Don't worry about it. I'm interested in
Yeah,
when
sorry. Anyway.
it never apologise. I'm interested in the space for you because you know you've moved into a sort of an academic space, and of course there's not a huge number of disabled people in those spaces, but you're also undertaking groundbreaking exploratory research. And at the same time, you're in that intersectional space of being part of the LGBTIQA plus community. And I wonder how what's been some of the biggest challenges that have faced you in pursuing this line of work over time? In the context of being a disabled person in a place where disabled people aren't supposed to go.
Yes, and as well as being trans, gender, and autistic and ADHD and those sorts of issues, I actually have physical disabilities too. So I'm often had to have been in a wheelchair. I've often had to walk with walking frames and walking sticks and stuff like this. So I move between them. So the difficulty is accessibility, whether it's accessibility physically, there are places you can't get to because there are too many stairs, or whether it's accessibility as being treated as somebody worth listening to because you're autistic. I mean, autistics, they sort of don't have insight into themselves. They don't have insights into others. That's a load of rubbish. There's people from every walk of life who won't have insight into themselves or into others. But to say this is particular for autistic people is a myth. And there's been lots of really banging on doors, writing letters, writing books in particular, presenting and trying really hard to bridge that divide. And I went back to school at 38 years of age, did year 11 and 12, got into university, did an undergraduate degree, and then went on to do honours and a PhD. But studying at 38 at a secondary school with 18-year-olds, they were brilliant. They taught me how to use a computer, the best thing that I ever did. Well, there's been a few things that are the best thing I've ever done, but it changed my life because handwriting is really quite hard for me. I used to write all my words all together. I didn't know you're supposed to put spaces. People didn't tell you things like that. Eventually, I learned that if you put your little finger in between the words, you can separate them by a space. But I was just thinking so fast, everything would just come out straight in front of me, and can't spell for toffees or for money, whichever comes first. And those things are all very difficult. So coming across to people who are academic, that I have a right to speak, that was really difficult to do. It was one of the reasons that pushed me to get a diagnosis, so that I am autistic. I have a right to speak. Lived experience is our experience, and people need to listen.
Yeah. And so what do you hope or expect or think this award might achieve in the context of your work?
Credibility. For me, it means everything, because I've been somebody that schools, I was always in the bottom classes, didn't matter how bright I was. I wrote poetry, on all sorts of places I wasn't meant to, because I just was compelled to write. Synesthesia, a crossover for me in colours and emotion. People don't take notice. So if you become an academic and you have psychologist after your name, PhD, this sort of thing, you earn a right to speak. It shouldn't be like this. People should be listening, but I just felt I really had to. I had to dedicate those years. And my wife has been amazing in supporting me, looking out to young people, kids home, feeding the cat, all sorts of things like this. So I'm driving a car. I can't drive a car. So I've had tons of support, just amazing support.
Fantastic. It's wonderful. We're almost out of time, believe it or
Sorry.
not. Oh, no, please do not apologise. What I always like to finish on when I talk to anybody is by asking a particular question. Who is a leader you admire and why?
his picture used to be on the back of the $100 note. The mountain person, the climber, begins with M. Mawson, absolutely, totally. I mean, he didn't ask his men or the people he was working with on all of those expeditions to do anything that he didn't do himself. And he was just one of those people. When I read his life story, I was just amazed, and meant a lot to me personally.
Yeah,
you know, because they were just fighting the elements, fighting everything was against them. Yeah, and that's how you feel, don't you, as an autistic person? So often everything's against us. So yeah.
Wonderful. I really want to thank you, Dr. Wenn Lawson, for making time for speaking to us today, and congratulations once again on receiving the Lesley Hall Award for Lifetime Achievement in the National Awards for Disability Leadership.
Thanks, Christina.
Thank
Very much
you.
appreciate. Thank you very much.